What's up, fight fans? It is, let's see, the 9th of October, 2017, and this is the Monday Morning Analyst. It is back for the first time in about a month. So, hi, my name is Luke Thomas. I'm the host of this podcast, 3 parts to it, an overview of the weekend's action, a sort of more in-depth look at something in particular, and then a look at what's coming up in the weekend or weekends ahead, depending on what's going on. So without further ado, let's jump into it. 2 events over the weekend that we're going to take a brief look at. Bellator 184, we'll do that second, and first, UFC 216. Now, on my personal YouTube channel, I did a UFC 216 post-fight special right after it was over. You can check that out, I believe, up here. I'm trying to point to the correct side of the screen. In any case, it'll be over on this side, I think. Your upper right-hand corner if you're looking at it. In any case, you can check that out for some more additional thoughts there. Some things in there I'll cover here, some things I don't. So if you're looking for something a little bit extra, be sure to check that out as well. But for this podcast, let us get into it. UFC 216 took place at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada for an attendance, quite light, I might add, of 10,638. That's not great. For a gate of 677,999, so basically 678,050 cents. That is also quite low. This is substantially less than what they do at UFC on Fox. I have no doubt that the shooting that happened on that Sunday probably impacted the entire city and events like this. On the other hand, I can tell you that the web metrics in the weeks leading up, and certainly that night, weren't any great either. So I don't think the shooting helped, but it's not the predominant cause of this being particularly low, and I would expect a very low buy rate for this. Just kind of a fact you have to accept. That being said, in the main event, Tony Ferguson defeats Kevin Lee via triangle choke at 4:02 of the third round. This is an unbelievable thing that Tony Ferguson has done. In October of 2013, he had a win over Mike Rio. That was his first win after the loss to Michael Johnson. 4 years later to the month, October 2017, he has defeated now 10 lightweights, defeated them, 7 of them by stoppage, and has become the interim champion. No one in the history of the lightweight division has ever done that. What an incredible fighter he is. What an incredible talent. I really take my hat off to him. And look, some of the things that in terms of technical deficiencies are still there. He's a little bit hittable. Guys are able to create angles on him. But a lot of the things that make Tony spectacular are only getting better. Cardio never drops off. He's as good in round 1 as he is in round 5. Frankly, he's better in round 5. He gets better as the fight goes on, which is very unusual. Some guys can maintain, and some guys have a little drop off. He actually gets better in my judgment. So there's that as well. His takedown defense was okay, not great, but Kevin Lee, I think, we'll talk about him in just a second, was able to get some of those body locks, but you'll see that Tony was pretty good about driving underhook and sitting his hips out when he needed to. Warmed up in that second round, right, was really good about sort of just flowing with the jab. I thought the jab of Tony Ferguson was really setting up a lot for him. And it was able to, as he was working from jab range, that enabled him to work at a proper range to defend takedowns better. And by that third, you'll see here, in the third round, he was able to score that triangle choke. To me, no accident, not least of which was because Lee had gas, but more on top of that, you'll see in the next segment that the seeds of that were kind of either planted or, the precursor to it all was visible in that first round. So, Tony's got a great guard, and he's a great wrestler, and he hits hard, and he's got a hell of a chin, and his cardio is amazing. I really think a matchup with him and Conor McGregor would be fantastic because in some certain respects, Conor poses a very strong challenge for him, and in other respects, Tony poses a very serious challenge for Conor. It'd be fantastic to watch. And so, I don't know that we learned a whole lot new about Tony, other than the thing I think that didn't get captured necessarily in this fight was didn't panic in bad spots. Kept his composure, stuck to a game plan, figured this guy out, and then rolled on him. And as Kevin tried to make the fight go to a place where his strengths were more pronounced, it didn't matter in the end. And I think that's the mark of a true champion. In the case of Kevin Lee, again, you didn't learn necessarily a whole lot new about Kevin other than his game is a lot better than we thought. And by that, we knew he had good takedowns. We knew he had good guard passing. But could he do those kinds of things on a guy like Tony Ferguson? The answer is yes. Obviously, that staph infection impacted him, and obviously that weight cut impacted him. So is there going to be a 165-pound weight class? Should there be? It's a different debate for a different time. But, Kevin Lee was able to do things to Tony Ferguson that even Rafael dos Anjos couldn't do, and so, not the same fighter at all, but it's in Barboza or whatever. Pick any of the guys he had gone through in the last 10 of those. Danny Castillo had some success wrestling, but couldn't pass guard quite the same way, only because Tony was going for Darces in the Danny Castillo fight. He didn't really go for any this time, but you just saw such well-rounded skills. You're going to see in the next segment really strong defensive fundamental skills from underneath. Tony's not just a guy who can score a nice anaconda and turn you, or a guy who can score takedowns when he needs them or defend them when he needs them. He can fight underneath. He can fight everywhere. In some places better than others, but he is no slouch off his back at all. But I think he just doesn't degrade as the fight goes on, and if you do substantially in the way that Kevin Lee did, it's going to be trouble for you. Kevin Lee, I think, opened up the eyes of some of the skeptics out there. Again, to be able to take mount, you're going to see in the next segment, the mount of Kevin Lee is sublime. I mean, that is about as good as a mount comes in MMA for the most part, especially in a lighter weight class where guys are squirmy and strong and explosive. But, wow. Unbelievable what he was able to do. So I really take my hat off to him. 25 years old, a lot of room for upside. We'll see where he goes from here, but we'll take a look at that fight more in depth in the second segment. Demetrious Johnson taking on Ray Borg via armbar, 3:15 of the first round. Oh, excuse me, the fifth round. Sort of occurred to me, right? You have these moments like this where this guy does this incredible acrobatic finishing move. Something kind of similar happened to Anthony Pettis when he fought Benson Henderson the first time, right? Where he ran off the cage and kicked him in the face. Now, that didn't finish Benson Henderson, although it nearly did. But something about these championship fights, because that was the last WEC fight, and that was for a championship belt. Something about those fights and at least about those two fights, where the eventual winner had this incredible acrobatic, high-flying moment of unbelievable skill and athleticism. The thing that's getting lost in this whole win was, yes, Demetrious Johnson was talking to Daniel Cormier, and yes, Demetrious Johnson was sort of taking his time and finding the back when he needed and passing and all those kinds of things, and that's all great, but it looked to me like in the clinch he was physically locking up with a guy much younger who was very strong, and Ray Borg was not able to physically match him there. We always talk about Demetrious Johnson as, oh my God, he's so smart, he's so technical, he's so clever, and he is all those things. But this is about as physically mature and developed as he's going to be. Is that going to be enough if he jumps up to bantamweight? Your guess is as good as mine, but certainly at flyweight, he has filled out, and he has matured physically to the point where, if he can't match you physically, he can beat you technically. If he can beat, or I should say, we always talk about getting advantages on him as, are your skills up to par? And then if he can't beat you in a certain department, he just takes it elsewhere. But we are really losing sight of the fact that he's marrying that skill with a really advanced developmental program of physical fitness. He is hard to deal with physically at that weight class now, in addition to all those other things technically. Beyond that, not really sure what to say. If you want to put him pound for pound best in the sport, hard to argue. If you want to put him greatest of all time, my only apprehension in saying it, I'm not saying it's not true, nor am I saying it is true. Worst case scenario, we're talking about a top 3 fighter all time. But is he number 1? I don't know, because I really don't know that we've parsed out what his wins mean. One thing I was looking at, I haven't finished some of the math on this, is, for example, is if you look at how many guys had wins in the UFC, how many fights did they have in the UFC, how many wins do they have, and how many years have they been fighting? You get guys like John Dodson or Joseph Benavidez, and they had, not only fights for a long time prior to fighting Demetrious Johnson, but in multiple weight classes. But you get guys like, Ray Borg, who didn't start fighting until 2012, in the case of Tim Elliott 2009, and some other guys. John Moraga did not have much experience. So, 11 is greater than 10, 10 is greater than 9, but what's harder, the 9 consecutive fights for a title defense that St. Pierre won, the 10 of Silva, or the 11 of Demetrious Johnson? I don't think we've really sort of measured exactly through a strength of schedule scenario which one is best. I'm perfectly willing to believe that it's Demetrious Johnson's. I am not arguing that it's not. I'm simply saying I'd like to see a better case than, 11 is greater than 10. Fabricio Werdum just walking over Walt Harris at 105. I credit Walt Harris for taking this fight, but a little bit too much. We'll take a look at that in the second segment as well. Romero Borella defeating Kalindra Faria at 254 of the first round. I'll talk about this more in my post-fight special, but wow, I didn't know much about Borella. Bit of a wake-up call for that one. Incredible jiu-jitsu. Totally technical, smothering while positionally advancing. Some people are really good about smothering and then holding position. She could smother and advance, and that is its own kind of skill and its own kind of skill set, so I really appreciate that from her. We'll see what she can do at women's flyweight. I don't want to say too much or too little, other than, you beat another person in UFC in under 3 minutes, and you did them by dominating them, and, easily transferring weight from mount to the back. No problem hand fighting at all. She appears to be the genuine article on the floor. I look forward to seeing more from her. Then Beneil Dariush and Evan Dunham fighting to a tie. I said on my post-fight special that, look, Dariush is 28. We'll see what else he can come up with. The thing about Evan Dunham is he has this reputation as like this up-and-coming guy in the division. And he is sort of a part of a second wave of post-tough lightweights, maybe even a third wave. But he's 35 years old, and I think you've sort of got the culmination of what he is going to be. Now, he can add a few skills here and there. He can certainly adjust game plans, and he is very, very talented everywhere. But this is basically as good as he's going to be. And so tying Beneil Dariush is not easy. That's not to say that, these guys are terrible. Far from it. These are great fighters. But I just feel like Evan Dunham's kind of topped out a little bit. Now, Dariush at 28, it would be wrong to say he couldn't grow more, but you can see if you're matching up with Evan Dunham in this way, and again, it just sort of sounds like, well, if all you can do is match up with Evan Dunham, it's not what I mean. What I mean is Evan Dunham is a excellent fighter, but he's not in the UFC. He hasn't proven to be a championship caliber fighter, and I think if Beneil Dariush really wants to go somewhere, there's a clear level up he can go that he needs to, and what he can add, I don't know, because his jiu-jitsu is great, fight IQ is generally pretty good, he tries to hit hard. He makes, for the most part, smart tactical choices. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe really switching things up. Maybe trying to go to the ground, advance, work from on top, really threaten these guys, really aggressive, a little more aggression maybe. Hard to say, but lots to like from both guys. They're very, very good. They're going to beat very good fighters, including Evan Dunham for a while if he wants to continue competing. But there's another level that they need to go to before we can really talk about them as championship contenders. You move to the preliminary card on FX. Cody Stamann taking on Tom Duquesnoy. This was a split decision, although I had it for Cody Stamann pretty easily. I think 29-28. Look, Tom Duquesnoy in that first round, man, he not only was able to string together strikes really well, he would collapse distance, and as he collapsed distance from different ranges, could chain together strikes that made the chaining in and of itself difficult to handle, and each part of the chain was appropriate for that distance. I mean, really incredible, flowy, in the words of Artem Lobov, kinds of stuff, but he just kind of fell off a cliff after that. Whether it's the weight class and he needs to move up one, whether, I don't know, there's a better way to get his strength and conditioning done. I don't know. When he's on and he's in a rhythm and he's pushing you back, Tom Duquesnoy is a nightmare, man. He's a total nightmare. But Cody Stamann, people keep sleeping on this guy. I was impressed with his UFC debut. I was impressed by what he saw here today. Is he as good of a striker as Tom Duquesnoy? Like, no, he's not. But he's really well-rounded. He has an excellent double, very athletic, powerful, can get right up underneath guys. He can do a lot, and he did do a lot, certainly enough to win in my judgment. And again, is he a top of the food chain kind of guy? I guess we'll see. It's still very, very early to tell, but Tom Duquesnoy, I'm not sure exactly if his game is predicated upon having that much energy, then he needs to put himself in a point where he always has that energy to let his game go. Because unlike Tony Ferguson, there's a substantial drop-off for Tom Duquesnoy. Substantial. And you don't really want to see that because he's really, really talented when he's on. He needs to make sure that he's putting himself in a place where he can constantly do that. Lando Venata and Bobby Green going to a split decision at 29-27, 27-29, 28-28. Man, that's crazy that they had a 29-27 for Bobby Green. That point against Lando really costing him in that first round, scoring that knee. Didn't appear all that impactful, but You know what? I'm actually kind of glad Herb Dean took a point. Here's why: because there's the instant replay rules are really limited. You can't just use them whenever you want. And in this particular case, I don't know that he got a chance to use it. I don't know that if you use the polling trick either that Dan Mergliotti used in the Weidman Mousasi case. Point being is, if he's forced to make a call, I'd rather them err on the side of taking the point than not. I think over time that will be much more beneficial. And he took it, and certainly it had a profound impact. But Lando Venata was looking good. He's good about, he charges at angles. You see this a lot. He charges at angles and then turns. And when he surprises you with it, he's incredibly lethal. A couple times, though, I wonder if he went to the well too much, because Bobby Green could read it and then catch him at the end of range. That was a bit of a problem for him. Also, the toughness of Green, my God, to get beat on like he did in that first round and then come back and dish it out. He had a good jab, too. There was a lot to like from both guys. I just feel like Lando Venata doesn't wear damage well, so even if he doesn't take much, it's not going to look great. And I also think, on top of that, he's taking a little bit too much damage. You're getting 4 fight bonuses in your first 4 fights. Man, that's pretty great, right? That's a lot of extra money. That's literally $200,000 extra that you didn't have before. Go buy a nice suit, but you need to think about why you're getting those. One, you're getting those because you're a badass, for sure. I mean, the wins over John Makdessi and the short notice fight with Tony Ferguson tells you a lot about that. All of his fights tell you about that. But he took a lot of abuse in that Tony Ferguson fight. He took a lot of abuse in his last one, and I forget who his opponent was before that, but that one was the one he lost as well. So, there's a lot more that needs to be done. He needs to protect himself, and I don't know if that's exactly dialing it back. Like in the case of Dariush, I'm sort of prescribing aggression. In the case of Lando Venata, I leave that more in the capable hands of Brandon Gibson, his coach, but I wonder if dialing it back a little bit might be a better tool, or keeping it at a certain range, or I don't know. But I just feel like he's just a little bit too willing to ignore abuse. It's one thing to say, I have a style that allows it, and then I'm going to make a change, right? I'm only going to stand on the feet for a short amount of time, and then I'm going to make a change. Guys like Frank Mir, sometimes when Frank Mir would get trapped up against the cage, this is true in the Shane Carwin bout. It's true to an extent, I think, in the Brandon Vera fight. He'll take a huge shot, and then what these guys want to do is they want to compose themselves. They say, don't panic, don't panic, don't panic. But there's a point where you shouldn't panic, but you've got to have some real urgency. And again, I think Venata had urgency, so I don't know that this is exactly the right prescription, but in the case of Mir, he would just not panic at all, and then the urgency would be screaming at him, and he wouldn't really do enough to change it. And then by that point, you get hit with that one shot where everything changes, and it's too late. I think Venata has a decent amount of urgency or awareness, but he just seems a little bit too willing to let these kinds of fights take over himself. Maybe adding in takedowns, maybe trying to, not too many, not too few, but just trying something to vary it up to allow this to be a different kind of fight, really work on your ground and pound. I don't know. We'll let them figure that out. But as it stands, it's a great amount of extra money he's getting, but it's a little bit too much given the kind of abuse. Poliana Botello defeating Pearl Gonzalez, unanimous decision, 30-27. Worst fight probably in a long time, maybe the worst fight in the UFC of the year. Not going to comment on the fight itself, other than to say the following. This is a clear situation where we need to empower the referee to force action. If you look at related combat sports, less so jiu-jitsu, but certainly in collegiate wrestling and in other forms of wrestling too, man, that ref has a whistle and he is on that bastard. He is constantly calling fouls, resetting, forcing action. Man, you go watch a wrestling match, they're sprinting all the time. And I'm not saying we need that exactly, but if you've got an underhook on one side and you're pressing the head away on the other, there's no takedown coming, right? If she's reaching here and the hands are broken and their posture is elevated and the head is facing, there's no takedown coming. At that point, if you're the referee, you need to be going 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5. And if it doesn't happen, break it, separate it. If they do it again, break it, separate. Once they were separated, you saw Botello, or Botello, however you pronounce it, opening up on her, right? I mean, look, if it's a spectator sport, then you need to treat it like a spectator sport. Spectators, are watching. This notion of we don't want to really interfere with the integrity, man, forget all that. Interfere. Get the referee in there and empower them, because they do have the ability to separate after these really prolonged exchanges. No, 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 no. We need to narrow that window substantially. Get them in there and get them working. Now, you need to be careful about that because certainly that can run the wrong way, where if somebody gets a takedown and a pass and they hold it for a second, the referee could be like, well, time to stand him up, and that would ruin the integrity. But here's what I would say. To start, on situations where someone is trying to take someone down against the fence and the hands are broken and the posture is broken and they've got a rounded back like a CrossFitter trying to do a deadlift, separate them. Separate them because nothing's going to happen. They're mechanically in a position to do nothing other than to waste our time. I think we should empower the referees to fix that. Matt Schnell defeating Marco Beltran, 30-27, 29-28, 30-27. I said a few words about Matt Danger Schnell on my post-fight special, namely that, I don't know what his upside is, really. I think it's probably not particularly high. I could be wrong about that. I hope I am. But my sense about him is he's a well-schooled fighter. He's not one of these guys who came off a reality. I mean, it's almost interesting that he came off a reality show and has not much of a popular name anymore. Because if he was like, I don't know, making a bunch of noise in the media or, I don't know, calling out weirdos and doing weird things on social media, it would be totally different. But this guy doesn't do any of that. He keeps his mouth shut. He shows up. He moves well. You can tell he understands what high-level MMA is supposed to look like at certain intervals. If I'm clinching, I should be doing this. If I'm at this range, I should be doing this, minding my P's and Q's. And, of course, like any fighter, he's pulling it off successfully to varying degrees. But he's a well-schooled, high-level fighter that is just trying to prove he can do it by fighting alone. And I really respect that. This was a really important win for him. If he had lost this, he probably would have been cut. And, his position in the UFC is probably still pretty tenuous. But I don't feel like we've ever had a conversation around Matt Schnell. I don't think we've ever really talked about him very much because he doesn't say a whole lot. He just tries to go out there and prove it. And he's had some hard times doing it. But, I thought he looked pretty good on Saturday. And I really, you can go and watch a regional level fight. Go watch a regional level fight. You'll see some guys, they don't move the right way. They don't make the right choices. And Matt Schnell makes a lot of the right choices and moves a lot of the right way. He's got his hands in the right place. His head's a little stiff in certain situations, but you can see him thinking through, I need to be moving it, I need to be moving it. What am I watching for? Where am I circling? Am I getting myself in a bad position? Where do my hands need to go in this underhook? What do I need to push off? What's the right course of action here? What's a good fake? What's a good feint? Like, you can see him doing all those things. That's what a high-level fighter is supposed to do. And I just feel like he deserved a little bit of comment. And then John Moraga defeating Magomed Babulatov. John Moraga coming out to Thuggish Ruggish Bone about as good as he gets. Beating Babulatov, one of Kadirov's guys. This was a great win for freedom. This was a great win for America. So pretty happy about that. John Moraga, I mentioned before, has had a really hard time in the UFC. He's beaten some good guys. He got thrown to the wolves early and had some bad losses and was contemplating walking away from the sport, was using the Performance Institute before most of the other guys to cut on costs. And, has had a hard road. That Pettis loss, came back, had the win in New Zealand, bounced back, and then had this one. Dude can sling the dogs. He is a very, very good fighter. He's a very talented wrestler. That's where he comes from, of course. And that left hand of death really sat Babulatov down. I very much appreciated that. Good to see John Moraga get some nice wins. I don't know how much longer he's going to be doing this, but it was good to see him get a big win. And Babulatov, I still think he's a very talented guy. He'll be back. And look, he's got all the skills in the world as well. But I don't think I think the hand speed of Moraga and the combination punching really shocked him. And then Brad Tavares just giving old Talis Laitis the beatdown, 30-27, 2-30-26. Did almost whatever he wanted to him. Talis Laitis has been in the game a long time, and he took a ton of abuse here. Brad Tavares, he had an amazing peek out in his last fight that was shocking to me. He can do a few certain things really, really well. I think there's a certain amount of, if you're beating a guy up 30-26, or you're really beating the brakes of him. Talis Laitis is hard to put away, don't get me wrong. But there's a certain amount of finishing that probably Brad Tavares could add to his game that's not exactly there right now. But in terms of the overall scope of a game, going from here to here, he's done that. He's really elevated the overall level of his ability. It's just there's a certain amount of fine-tuning here or there, and then it's almost like Beneil Dariush in this Evan Dunham scenario. It's like no one ever came close to really putting on the other guy, and that can't happen every time. But I feel like, let me look at Brad Tavares' record. You just look at this. He lost to Robert Whitaker and Tim Boach, and then since the Phil Baroni win at UFC 125, everything else has been a decision, split or unanimous. You got to be really putting it on a guy more than that. And he's fighting tough guys, but you got to really, there's something that you got to be able to add to this, because just this many rounds is hard on the body and not great for a long career, even though he's been in it for about 10 years now, a little bit longer. How much longer, I don't know. Another guy who, by the way, has a sort of reputation like Evan Dunham, is super young, and in this case, Tavares is 29, so he's still got some time, but we'll see. Let's move to Bellator 184. This is Dantas versus Caldwell. This took place at the Nubs Thackerville WinStar World Casino in Oklahoma. Darrion Caldwell defeating Eduardo Dantas 48-47, 48-47, 50-45. Surprised by the refereeing here. I believe it was Jason Herzog, who also worked the UFC the next night, not really calling a ton of the fence grabs from Eduardo Dantas. Also kind of interesting about Eduardo Dantas, he's faced a number of wrestlers of different varieties in his career, guys who like to go for control positions, get in that tight waist and holding it. We talked about it before. That tight waist is hard to break once the guy locks it up. Yoel Romero and Robert Whitaker, or Chris Weidman on Kelvin Gastelum. It's hard to break that. It's hard to really make distance with that. They do a little bit differently in collegiate wrestling from referee's position, where you can start with a grip on the elbow and everything, and the spiral ride, but or across the belly. But the point being is, he couldn't really break it, even though you would think he'd work on this a little bit more, given who he fought Joe Warren twice, I believe, if not more than that, and he just didn't really have an answer for Darrion Caldwell. Darrion Caldwell was many leagues beyond Joe Warren at this point, but you get the idea. It's just this was a challenge that fairly easy to predict what you're in store for, and he still could not do a whole lot about it. Never got fully overwhelmed, and I think Darrion Caldwell needs to really ask himself about, how much can I really advance if winning via control position is my major method of victory against the very, very best. But Darrion Caldwell is, let's see how old Darrion Caldwell is. He's not that old, 29 himself. Doesn't have a ton of miles on him at this point either, although he had the injuries from wrestling. But long story short, an amazing win for Darrion Caldwell. I'd just like to see him add a little bit more striking comfortability, not even lethality, but like in the case of Cody Stamann, going back to UFC, he can wrestle as much as he needs to, and he can strike almost as much as he needs to. I would like to see Caldwell have a little bit more of a direct balance in that way. Emmanuel Sanchez getting the win of his career over Daniel Strauss at 156 of the third round. They were having a back and forth there positionally, but Emmanuel Sanchez being able to pass, take him out, move to the back at various times. He really was giving Strauss everything he could handle. I want to go through this. This is Sanchez's career. He's only 27. In Bellator, he started off with a submission. Then he goes to Alejandro Villalobos, wins unanimous decision. Loses to Pat Curran via unanimous decision. Split decisions, Henry Corrales. Split decisions, Justin Lawrence. Split decisions, Daniel Pineda. Split decision, loses to Daniel Weichel. Decisions, Georgi Karakanian. Decisions, Marc Galvan. And then finally submits in his, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, in his 10th Bellator bout. So his first Bellator bout and his 10th, he gets a submission, but this time it was over a former champion. Just really adding a lot. He did. You want to talk about a guy who we talked about adding danger to some of these guys. Working on Brad Tavares. Working on some of these finishing skills and these finishing scenarios, right? Because to finish a guy, you got to be in a position to do that. If you're just striking on the outside the whole time and you're fencing, like in the case they were of, so that's what Schnell and Beltran were doing, sort of standing at when they were at close range. There was a lot of action. When they were standing far apart, it was just kind of like pick a shot and pick a shot and pick a shot. It wasn't all that entertaining. You got to put yourself in a position to get that, and man, Sanchez mixed it up with him and just beat him grappling. It's as simple as that. Was able to get the takedown for the most part when he needed it, and was able to work from it. And he got taken down too. He got reversed too. Strauss is no gimme. But, man, what a win. What a huge, huge win for Emmanuel Sanchez. This is the win that he's been looking for in his career. It's the best fighter he's faced to date. Pat Curran, maybe you could say, but Pat Curran has given up his full-time career as a fighter. Now he's still fighting full-time, but he's got a full-time job, too, as an HVAC guy, HVAC tech. So I don't really know about his future, although we'll talk about him in a minute. But a great win, and he finished him. He threatened him. Really a critical turning point in the career of Emmanuel Sanchez, and proof that Bellator featherweight division is not to be trifled with. Then you move to Pat Curran defeating John Teixeira, 29-28, which I don't understand, 30-27 and 30-26. Pat Curran doing a really good job, man. They criticized him for not really jumping on a guy when he could have, and I think that's a very fair criticism. But, man, he could just tell, John Teixeira was just coming forward all the time. Straight pressure, not really doing a lot of fakes and feints, throwing uppercuts. Pat Curran was really good about getting his head off the center line and then coming over the top with something and then finishing on the other side. And he was drilling Teixeira over and over. That's not his, he goes by a different name, but he was drilling Teixeira over and over again. Had him wobbled a number of times. Very, very good win for a guy who'd been off for longer than a year, who, again, is not training full-time like he used to. But he said he was so beat up and so injured from that full-time life that he finally was going into a fight healthy and refreshed and not worried. How much better is he really realistically going to be? I don't know. Something to be said for Pat Curran and where he is in his career. But he doesn't think he's too far from a title shot, and neither do I. That was a phenomenal win by Pat Curran. Really strong stuff against a very, tough, aggressive challenger in Teixeira. And then Leandro Higo defeating Joe Time and Glow, 30-27 and 2 scorecards, 29-28. The one that was kind of interesting, I still did not see, Carrington Banks defeating Steve Cazzola, 30-27 and 2 30-25s. That is a very, very bad loss. And Thunder Beast had made a lot of noise. Remember, he was the guy who called out Dylan Dantas in his win at the Bellator in Chicago. I don't know what happened to there on this one. I did not get a chance to see that. Okay, let's do something. So everyone and their brother is going to break down Demetrious Johnson's armbar, and they should. It's amazing. But it's fairly easy to see what happened. Throws him up, and if you throw someone in the air, what's your natural instinct going to be? To brace your hands out. When your hands come out, that's when he scoops it and goes down. Not saying it's easy to do, but I'm just saying it's not particularly... you guys kind of get what's happening there, I think is a fair way to put it. There were two things I want to sort of pinpoint in the next segment. One, Fabricio Werdum's jiu-jitsu is just like so effortlessly good. I want to show you that. And I also want to show you, like, Tony Ferguson, what he's done at lightweight. Everyone talks about the streak about Demetrious, and they should. But the 10 wins at lightweight, literally no one's ever done that in the UFC. I mean, just think about that. Think about how many good lightweights there have been. No one's ever done what Tony Ferguson has done in that weight class. That is amazing to me. And he won that fight for a reason, which you're going to see. But I don't really want to go through the whole fight. I kind of feel like Kevin Lee opened up some eyes. Let's see what Fabricio did. Let's see what Kevin Lee did. And through what Kevin Lee did, you're also going to see why Tony eventually won, because you can see everything that didn't exactly work in the first worked like a charm in the third. So let's do this. Without further ado, let's take a look at those two things, and we'll do so in greater detail right now. There's lots to like from UFC 216, but I kind of want to spotlight just a couple of things. Obviously, DJ's armbar is amazing, but everyone and their brother's kind of talking about it, and I don't think, as I mentioned before, it necessarily requires a tremendous amount of breakdown. You can kind of see what he's doing, how he's setting up the arm and everything, but there's two other things I kind of want to spotlight because it's not getting nearly as much attention, and I'm not saying they're as good, but because they're not getting as much attention, I wanted to shine a little spotlight on it. Two things. Number one, the fight between Fabricio Werdum and Walt Harris, as well as round one versus Kevin Lee, or between Kevin Lee, I should say, and Tony Ferguson. Let's go first to Werdum. This fight does not last long, and there's no real overarching theme here, except there's just a tremendous difference in ability here on the ground, maybe even everywhere, but certainly on the ground. And it manifests itself so quickly. A lot of times when people say, if you've never rolled before, or even if you have rolled, if you go against somebody who's like a really good black belt, you just find yourself in quicksand before you even know what has happened. That's what this fight is. That's exactly what this fight is. So let's watch and see what Werdum does here. Again, we don't capture everything, but the basic nuts and bolts you'll get. They're facing off, and Werdum does a thing where he charges. By the way, Walt Harris backs up in a straight line, only curves once he gets against the fence, and Werdum kind of shaves him here with a haircut. With a high kick, right? Sort of getting him to acknowledge that he's going to go high. So they reset, and you can see he kind of lowers his level, threatens again, and that forces Walt to bring his hands up. As a consequence, he gets right underneath, right? So Werdum goes high, fakes high again, or at least fakes a motion, gets the hands to come up, and shoots underneath. He grabs the leg. He's got a single leg now, so he's trying to go clockwise. That's the direction he's trying to go. And as long as this is on the outside, not saying you can't get it, it's just very, very hard. You want this in between your legs so you can get your shoulder deep on the hips, you can get your body weight on top of the leg, and you can do a lot with it. Now, I want you to pay attention to something here. You can look at the hip hinging that both guys are doing. Both guys are bent over here in this tussle. He has a whizzer here, sort of like a whizzer. That's a whizzer. And then you have this overhook of the leg, right? So a whizzer is an overhook of an underhook. It's not an underhook across the hips and the ribs, but you get the idea. So right now he's okay, but what's going to happen is Werdum's going to sit up, and as he sits up, what he's going to do is he's going to bring. Look at his posture. Now he's not hip hinging as much, and look at the posture of Walt, way less bent over, right? And as a consequence, he's going to move his leg out of the way, raise the posture. What this is going to do is he's going to bring this leg across his own body, and now when he wants to put weight on it and go back down and then turn, you can see what he's able to do. He puts weight back down on it, blocks the direction he wants to go, and then just drives on it and then takes him down. I want you to know something immediately. He posts his feet. He doesn't leave his feet. He gets his hands, and he lands on his hands right away. Why? Why does Werdum land on his hands? For a couple of reasons, but probably the biggest one is that in the event that a big guy like Walt recognizes he was going down, because it wasn't like the single leg was shot, takedown. Right? It was shot, jockey, turn, jockey, turn, and then takedown. So he knew that it was coming. In the event that happens, you don't want to get rolled. So Werdum puts both hands down, spreads his base out. Look at how wide everything is, and then just guides himself to the ground. And this is where it just goes from bad to worse. He ends up in half guard. I don't really know what Harris, I'd have to talk to him. I don't really know exactly what he was trying to do here. You're going to watch, he has an overhook here, and he has bicep control, or, bicep frame on this side. Okay, you can't do much with it, but you're not in terrible danger here necessarily. But he does this. Watch him shrimp his hips to the left. He's going to sit up there. See that, how he shrimped his hips? He gets on his right hip, he shrimps out to his left. Okay, if you're going to do that, then you need to have this left hand as the underhook, and then you stand that way. But he doesn't. He just keeps the bicep grip, and then he overhooks the right, which, like, he's freeing his hips and creating an angle, and then locking himself on this side. Because there's no sweep here. Look at Werdum. Like, you can't use this shin on the instep here and then sweep him. It's blocked completely. So I don't know exactly what he's doing here. So Werdum uses that as an opportunity to just twist him. And as he twists him, I can't tell who initiates the motion. I can't tell if it's Werdum who picks up the hook or if it's Walt who tries to turn him. It's not exactly clear, and you can see Werdum is balancing himself the whole time. Werdum does the turning here, and I believe he does it on top, but watch how he switches his legs. He does a leg weave pass in the air. In the air. Watch this. He's in half guard here. So his right leg is between the legs of Harris. His left leg is on the outside. Here's what he's going to do. He's going to bring his hips over. He's going to slide his right leg out and then bring his left leg on top of everything like that. See how the left leg is on top and the right leg swings out? Go back and look at this one more time. Here he is in half guard. He's going to rotate the hips over to Walt Harris's left side. As he does, he's going to bring his own right leg out and keep the left leg on top, which is going to help him when he gets here. All right, look at this. He's going to get here. Now he's got this hooked, so Harris can't stand, and he couldn't stand anyway because he has no overhook. But as Harris goes back to his base, he's literally, I'm not exaggerating, he's literally going to drag Werdum into mount. Watch this. As Werdum hooks this leg here, if you're on your left and you roll flat and Werdum has already cleared this inside leg of Harris, what's left? As he goes back, he's just going to pull he's going to pull Werdum right on top. And then Werdum is here. He's crushing the hips. This is sort of what you would call, you're past leg drag at this point, but you can get to here from leg drag. And then he just takes him out. So, like, this is an amazing sequence. He was in half guard, rotates the hips over, pulls the leg in between the half guard out, puts the other one on top, so that when he rolls back off of his left hips and he goes straight, he pulls Werdum into mount on top of him. Pretty nasty stuff. Now, from here, it's hard to know exactly what Walt does. Kind of gets a frame to turn, right? Because you never want to be flat on your back, but you don't want to just turn wildly either. Keeps going. And you could see Werdum, what's he doing here? A couple things. Number one, he's got a far control. He's got this arm across. He hasn't quite locked it in yet, but now he's going to slow how you roll. He's going to create space on the opposite side depending on what he wants to do. He's going to have his weight down on this leg. So if you turn, you're going to turn very slowly, which is going to give Werdum all the time and space he needs to set up whatever attack he's going to set up. Then from there, look at that. Total control. See that? He's probably got a hand in here in case he wants to keep that space open. He's got control of your hips. You're going to roll, but you're going to roll at Werdum's speed, not yours. And so he finally gets to his base. Werdum is giving him space to stand. You notice he keeps that tight waist around there because it's going to enable him to put his hook in there if he needs to. It's going to enable him to, again, to slow and control the roll. It's going to enable him to do a lot of things. Walt just kind of sits up here, which is exactly what Werdum wanted him to do. And I want to pay attention to something here. A lot of guys take back like they're jumping on a horse, you know, where like the far leg comes over first. Not saying you can't do that in certain circumstances. A lot of times you'll see guys put the knee in here and then bring the leg across and then put the other hook in. But generally speaking, the near inside hook goes first and then the other one goes around, which is exactly what Werdum does. By the way, look at him still occupying that space with that far arm. So he sinks that right hook. Look at this, totally controlled, leaves everything open, sinks the second hook. And that arm is helping create space for that leg. I mean, this just is as technical as you get, and it just goes from bad to worse super quick. Now Walt is on his knees. We talked about this with the Mickey Gall and CM Punk fight, right? This is not a great spot to be, but it's a lot better than this when you're getting yanked off of your base to a side. From here, you see Harris thinks he's going to get 2-on-1 control. Harris is thinking, okay, I don't want him here around my neck. He's going to go for a choke. Let's get 2 hands on 1 on the other side. That way I can be free of this. But as you do that, you're just giving Werdum the angle he needs for this. Here comes the armbar. It's easy to control. You're putting 2 hands on 1, meaning he's got a free arm underneath to hook, which is exactly what he does. And he brings this right over the top from there. And I want to pay attention to something here. You know, obviously when you have an armbar, you want to have your knees pinched, but it's this leg that's doing all the work, or I should say the predominant amount of work in terms of posture control, because this is the one that's going to prevent him from sitting up and rolling. Like right here, he had a moment to roll or to drop his hips down and turn, but he didn't know what was coming because he just thought he was going to maintain 2-on-1 control. Whoop, and it comes around. This is the leg that prevents Harris from sitting up. And from here, you're going to just watch him turn over. And this is the one, you know, he's driving his ankles to his rear end here, and he's going to lift his hips off the ground, and that's all she's going to, that's it. That's all she wrote. It's classic, super textbook stuff. Just never knew what was coming, never knew how to react to it, created every opening possible. Werdum knew exactly what this guy was about to do and had an answer for it at the exact moment that he needed to have an answer for it, switches the base, gives him 2-on-1, just says, thank you, I'll just take the armbar. Boom, done. Turns over, face up, drives his hips up. I mean, look how far across the legs are at this. You know, so far. His rear end's right on top of the shoulder joint. This was over. This was over. Fantastic job by Fabricio Werdum. Now, let's look at the first round of Lee versus Ferguson. All right, so look, in the end, Tony Ferguson won, and he won this because I think right now he's the better fighter. Yes, Kevin Lee had staph infection, and that couldn't have been easy. Yes, he had an incredible weight cut. That couldn't have been helpful. You know, it's hard enough to beat Tony Ferguson. It's even harder when you've tried to cut 19 pounds in 24 hours or whatever the precise number might have been. But I think what happened here was, one, Tony showed us why he's a champion and deserves to be a champion. And I think, as I mentioned before, a lot of that's going to get recognized. I think one thing that isn't going to get quite as much recognition is what a great job Kevin Lee did in that first round. Now, again, wasn't enough. The better fighter is Tony. And we're going to talk about some of the ways Tony was able to finish, because you see flashes of that, frankly, in the first round. But I really want to pay attention to this first round because you see a lot of some of the good things that Kevin Lee does really well. I want to refer you to a BJJ Scout video where he talks about the way in which Kevin Lee likes to get body lock takedowns. Go watch that, then come back and watch this, because that's going to make sense for a lot of the takedowns that Kevin Lee tried. And by the way, Tony Ferguson was able to stop a couple of them along the way. But in the end, especially in that first round, Kevin Lee's wrestling dominance really showed. So let's take a look at what happened here. Again, we're not going to go over everything, just some of the highlights from here. They're at distance. He throws a cross as Tony kind of steps in. I don't know exactly what Tony was trying to do. It's really hard to read from the video. It looks like he was trying something and then abandoned it. You can't really say. So then he decides, well, I'm close to him. Tony is retreating. Let me just go ahead and lock up a body lock. As he does, this is what saves Tony for the most part right here. He immediately digs in that left underhook. Typically, what Lee likes to do is just have total control of the ribs. No underhook there. He'll work with an underhook, much like Khabib Nurmagomedov will in certain cases. But against a really good wrestler like this, you don't want to give him anyone. But Tony sneaks it in. So this kind of saves him a little bit, and you'll see why in just a second. So he turns him here all the way around, right? You never just, I mean, you can do blast doubles straight, but they're kind of hard. It's better to go in a circle. It's harder to control balance in a circle, right? So he circles this way around, behind himself actually, comes around, and you can see Tony is still on the balls of his feet here, and he's got that one underhook on the other side. That's going to matter because as Lee crashes, right, he's going to come down here like that. Look at the way in which he's never able to settle his hips. Tony puts a foot in the ground and is immediately turning, and he's probably trying to use this as a sort of a sweeping blocking mechanism, like a scissor sweep. And he's using that other underhook, the one that he used to save himself, to turn Lee over here. This is smart reactive decision making from Tony Ferguson. I want you to look at this. Look at it. He's going to turn him over here. Now he's got his hips to the side. This is bad. Kevin Lee is saving himself a little bit here with these live toes, but look at this. He's now going to wrap him up here. Now Lee's hips are facing up as opposed to down. Not all the way up, but more so up than down. Look at this. I just want to pay attention to something here. Look at this from Kevin Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've never been in a scramble like this, it's impossible to communicate this. That Lee ultimately wins this battle tells me something. Number one, well, it's more than just one or two things. Let's just focus on what the most important one is. Kevin Lee's base and his core strength might be the best in the lightweight division. It is shocking that he wins from here, because there's no good reason for him to do that. Now, maybe the underside arm of Ferguson was trapped, so he couldn't post all that well, and that can contribute to it. You can see the hands here are kind of through for both guys. Neither one's really able to get a hand through in the way that they probably wanted. Actually, no, here's Lee's hands, the blue and the blue. So here you see Tony's hands, or his hand, I should say, squeezed through. So he's kind of trapped. But even with that, for his hips to be covered and facing at best sideways and predominantly up, and to still come out on top, and by the way, he can't post on his hand either, is shocking. You'll see him post on his head and basically just He-Man his way forward. It is shocking for him to do this. I cannot be clear about this. To win a scramble like this, no, it's not super technical. It's not. This was a battle of wills and a battle of strength. But sometimes if you can't use technique like you want to, you got to find something else. And that's exactly what he did here. This is an amazing, I'm blown away by this. An amazing display of core strength and base and balance by Kevin Lee. No good reason he should have won that, and he did. Now, you see, part of the reason why is he pushes off Tony at an angle. He frames on his head, and he gets up on his toes like Andre Galvao properly does for, let's say, a half-guard butterfly sweep. A lot of people think you just roll to your side. You don't. You roll at an angle, and you want to be on the underside on your toes, lifting everything up, really getting some nice extension, which is exactly what he does here. And this enables him to get his hips facing the mat, which is more what you want. Now, from here, if Tony had the ability to, or the presence of mind, or the desire, he could have armbarred him right here, because this is the sort of Cat Zingano, Ronda Rousey position that he was giving him here. But I think he was trying something else. I don't think he wanted to go for it right here. He probably was content to sort of get up and move away from the scramble. But you can see again, look whose hips are, just dominating him. And he's still finding a way to come through, posts a hand, stands up, and now he's got control of that hip, and that works to his benefit because he can just roll and turn the other way. That is a shocking display of strength. He must have a ridiculous amount of core strength to win a battle like that. I watched it in real time, and I laughed. I laughed at how strong he must be. Kevin Lee is strong as an ox, okay? Which is partly why I think when he gets those takedowns and there's no underhook and he's right on your ribs and your hips, he must feel like Hercules. Okay. But Tony, ever the clever guy who's got an answer from all positions, it seems like, immediately begins to try and lock up a triangle or at least mission control. So you see him go from here. He's going to try and you want to look at your own palm on mission control, as I understand it. Pull down on the heel. Grab around, and he wanted to go for a triangle here. And I think you can finish it even with the arm inside if you have to, but people who might know more about the rubber guard should correct me if I'm wrong on that. But what's saving Lee here is this arm on the inside. Remember, 2 arms in, you're okay. 2 arms out, you're okay. 1 arm in, 1 arm out, you're in trouble. So he keeps this one here, which, number 1, prevents Tony from really locking it down, and 2, just creates just enough space to avoid things. But I want to show you something here, and you can see him hugging his own knee here, which is right. You see him coming on clamped, but this is the thing that's saving him for the most part. This is the thing that's saving him, because you see Kevin Lee's got his hands on the mat here. Not great, right? Not great, especially against the guy who's got a good rubber guard. Super not advisable that you do that. But the problem is the clamp just isn't enough. It's not just merely blocking it, but you can see he's kind of spreading it with his hands here, which enables him just to sneak his head out from underneath and get out. Now, Tony immediately transitions to an omoplata. Look at his legs here, right? They're just kind of locked at the ankles, and as soon as Lee pops his head out, he kind of clamps on with the back of this leg. Let's see how he does it. Like that. And now he's going to try and tuck this into his pocket, so to speak. But Lee recognizes and knows this is coming, so he's going to come and step around. All right, so here we are. A couple interesting things here. He's going to keep going around, all the way around. Oh, it is digitized. Now, I made this point before. He's going to switch his base, too, by the way. If you look at his base here, sort of flat, he's going to come around. Now his hips are kind of facing this way, so he's switching his base a little bit. I want to point out something here. It's not always the case. Don't take this as like a rule every time you see it. It's the end of the world. But anytime someone is attempting to pass and the person underneath is posting and pushing away, this is usually a very bad sign for the person underneath. That is usually a sign that they're out of answers and don't really know what to do next, or at least for buying themselves some time. Now, that's the exception. If you're going to do it for just a second while you're buying yourself, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the most, that's okay. No big deal. But if you sort of prolong to do this, it means someone beat you, and this is sort of your last-ditch effort just to sort of keep them off of you. Now, Lee's arm is trapped, but it's not going to do much good, because what's going to happen here, as you can see, it's still kind of trapped. But what's going to happen is he's just going to open up with knees here. And this is going to force a loosening of the position, which is good for Tony. And I want to point out here, I don't really go into round 3, which is really a great round for Tony for a lot of reasons. But I want to show you that you could see seeds of the problems that Lee was going to face already in round 1. He locks up full guard. Look at this from Kevin Lee. There's a lot about this I don't like, to be honest. And the reason why is, number 1, there's no live toes. Which kind of is going to hurt him a little bit. 2, very hard to pass on your knees. You can pass on your knees. Not saying it's not possible, but typically you want to be standing or at least some kind of crouched position, right? Especially from full guard. It's going to be really hard to get someone to open up like that. And here's the other problem for me that you're going to see. It's not as pronounced here because he's sort of hip hinging backwards, but look at how lengthened out he is. He's trying to do a can opener, probably to help open up the guard or to set up ground and pound, and that's fine. But in the 3rd round, he had his knees back here, his weight pulled forward, and his arms all the way out. You're giving a lengthy guy, and a lanky guy, I should say even, in Tony Ferguson, all the space he needs to set up a submission. And a guy like Tony, who has a good guard, who doesn't get tired, and you're going to give him the spatial kind of lengthening he needs to get a submission, to me, given what we saw in round 1, as soon as you get tired, all of the defensive lapses here become extremely pronounced. If you have good cardio, great cardio, maybe you can cover for it here. But if that cardio slips at all, this is real bad. This can be down the road real bad. But Kevin Lee wasn't done. But this is the seed here to me. Just way too much length he's giving up. If he's sitting back on his heels, that's not as problematic, but later on in the fight, you see he doesn't. So much length, and all that length makes it very, very easy for Tony Ferguson, or makes it easier, I should say. It's never easy, but easier to get what he wants. Now, that being said, look at that length, man. See, I just don't like that. Reaching up and trying to go for, look at Tony. You could see him clamping down on the arms, and in fact, he goes for this arm bar here. It was a little too far away for me. I would have liked to see him tucked under a little bit more, but be that as it may, he goes for it. Lee rights his posture. See what happens when you're look. There's no submission when you're perfectly straight up like this. It's just hard to do. But when you're outstretched, it's very easy to get. And if your cardio is good, you can do this. Once it begins to fade, a bit more of a problem. And this is something I want to show you. This is actually my favorite pass. You can't just throw the guy to the side. What you really want to be able to do is you want to be able to drive your shoulder in an ideal scenario into the back of the knee, and you want to make them, in the words of Renzo Gracie, you want to make them smell their knee. You want to drive this knee down. And the reason why is because you plant them when you do that. You're driving all their weight, and you're literally gluing, not literally, but you're gluing them to the mat. And that gives you the ability to just then slide the leg out of the way. If you just kind of push it out of the way, and he does a little bit more than that. He pressures and then he hooks it, which prevents them. But he doesn't fully occupy the space because he didn't fully close it on the pass itself. But he is on his toes, which I really appreciate. So he has to come all the way around to then take the spot. And that's okay too. That's fine depending on what you want to do. Here's what I really like from him. He's got his hip resting on his face. That is exactly what you want to do. That is exactly what you want to do. A lot of guys don't do this. They'll go to like a semi-north-south, and they'll have their hips doing something else. You want to get that hip right on their face, and you want to be putting weight on that joker. Make them suffer underneath. Make them carry weight underneath. It's exactly what you want to do. Really like that from Kevin Lee. Now, again, you're just pushing on the back of the elbow as he's hooked the arm. Again, hip right in the face. There's not a lot. You're not really doing a lot. You're just kind of preventing a last-minute thing, and you'll see it doesn't work because as he begins to right, he brings his knee in here, his knee in here. Yes, he has an elbow here, Tony Ferguson does, but it's not doing a whole lot, and plus he's going to end up collapsing it. He's going to come inside, and Tony now sees this. You can see him. He fishes his arm inside. That's good because you want to block this hip. That part is good, but you want to be on the inside of this one a little bit more thoroughly, which he's not, right? So then, basically what Lee does is he turns this way and then drops down. So now he's closer to the hips. This is better, but it's still not enough. And you can see if you're just pushing away at somebody, you can push for a second, 2, even 3, but then you got to do something. And he doesn't. And so what ends up happening is when you push down like this and you're blocking the hip, this enabled Kevin Lee to get this arm out and then cross-face. That is central. That cross-facing is key because that's going to enable him to control the neck and the head. The 2 points of control, the hips, the head, and the neck. Head and the neck sort of together. So that's the 2 points there. You want to control what's happening across the belt line and want to control what's across the chin neckline. That's what you got to be doing. That's exactly what he does here with this cross-face. Then he goes a little bit from bad to worse. This is good by Tony, having this thing in here. You want to have the other hand on the inside here more usually. There's no real good reason to give up the crossface because it's so essential to control. You'll see a lot of white belts come in, and someone will put them in a crossface, and then you'll have a far side hip control like this or something. And if you're as good as Tony, you can get out of this. But generally speaking, it's not magic. If someone's controlling your hips, or at least blocking them, and someone's controlling your head, you can try all the shrimping you want. You're not going to go very far. You gotta get off this crossface. You have to break this crossface off. And so what winds up happening is to add more weight and value to this crossface, Kevin punches him in the head. Why? Because Tony wants to address that. You can see him stick his hand out to block the bicep. But that's a bad idea because then that gives Kevin everything he needs to control that elbow. Look at how far Tony's elbows are away from his body and his hips here, right? Not what you want. And yes, he could bring this one on the inside and he could block this hip, and that's good. But now he's giving it up on the other side. Well, what does that turn into now? That turns into this. This Hercules who's got a crossface here and an underhook on the far side. Now he's just going to slip out to the side completely because he is pinning you on top. He is completely pinned. Look how much, Tony's squirming underneath, but look how much he has pinned him here. That's what that is. That is not a wrestling pin exactly. It's more like a jiu-jitsu pin, and it's used, if I can control everything up top, and I've got a little at least occupying the outside of space of your hips, I can move around a lot and keep you where you need to go while I go where I need to go. Right? Real bad. This is strong by Kevin Lee. You could tell Kevin Lee, man, he's got that wrestler jiu-jitsu where it's very technical. Don't get me wrong. But, man, when they put the squeeze on you, it just locks you into place, So then he goes to the side. Tony turns. Look at how Tony's hips are facing like this. Almost baiting him. I actually think Tony was baiting him here to take them out because maybe he thought he could reverse. I don't know exactly what he thought, but he's just turning into him here. Kevin reads the feel and then just takes it and goes and doesn't take it like a horse. Slides the shin across, right? And then flare your ankle out like a windshield wiper. That's how you do it, gang. You don't just jump over someone's hips. It's almost like a knee on belly. You just slide across. Does it, and then comes out the other side. Tony tries to buck and roll. You can see he blocks here and then tries to underhook him over, which I can understand, but it's too little too late. Kevin Lee closes his hips, puts his weight on his hand, and brings his ankles together. And I think at this point, also he's controlling the head, by the way, so there's not exactly a whole lot you're going to be able to do at this point. And that brings Tony Ferguson down back to earth here. You can see him trying to buck and roll. He's not going to go anywhere. This is an excellent mount from Kevin Lee. This is an excellent mount. Really high-level marks for me, and I don't know what the coaches at MMA might say, but I would be shocked if any of them disagreed with me. This is a superb mount from Kevin Lee. Really, really effortless stuff. And he does everything just about as perfectly as one can do. But, Tony, as he always does, has an answer and is a tough guy, which we'll look at in just a second. But let's compliment Kevin Lee on this mount. First of all, to get to mount on Tony Ferguson, who does that? Right? He gets there, and then he does this Rico Rodriguez, Tyoshi Kosaka kind of bit, where he crosses his ankles underneath. You don't necessarily need to do that, but that's a really great mount. Here's the other point. He's sitting back on Tony's hips, but whenever Tony tries to buck, you'll notice he sits up a little bit and puts his weight on his knees, which are being pinched. So he's not giving Tony a lot of room to buck at that particular juncture, and even if he does buck, it's not going to have as much of an effect on him, but he's not done here. You can see him slowly kind of inching up a little bit. Tony is bridging here. Not much, but he's bridging a little bit. Doesn't matter. Ankles crossed, knees pinched. This is bad. This is a really bad mount for Tony Ferguson in this particular case. Now, he's kind of a little bit closer. You can see Tony, I think, holding on to him and then pulling his hips out a little bit. But it's not really going to matter a whole lot. Now, here he could have bucked him a little bit and bucked and rolled maybe, depending on what he wants to do. This is that one moment where Kevin got a little bit stalled out, but not for long. Check this out. He's wrestling Tony here. He's now, sitting up, so there's not as much room to be bucked. Right? If you're sitting on someone's hips and they buck, you'll come forward. If I'm resting on my knees and I squeeze my glutes and I drive my hips forward, now I'm resting on my knees. Now there's space underneath, but if my knees are pinched, it's not enough space for you to get out. It's just enough space for me to deny the bucking. Right? And then watch this. Slides high. Look at how high this mount is. Not content to sit back here. Get up under there. And I want to show a picture here. He does it on the other side as well as he's raining down punishment. Bro, look at this mount. He can't even cross his feet anymore because he's not behind the hips. He's now next to the ribs. And what's he doing? He's putting the ankles right along the rib line of Tony Ferguson. Boy, that's excellent. High level marks for this mount by Kevin Lee. I think and I didn't think he could do this to Tony Ferguson. He surprised me with this. I take my hat off to the guy. This is a superb mount that he has. Really, really nice stuff. Positionally good. And look at him again. He's not all the way up, but even if you buck, which he does here, it doesn't do anything. Look at that. He's flat on his back here. He's going to get his ankles underneath. He's going to raise up. What's it going to do? Nothing. Because Kevin Lee's already in a position to ride it. He has created enough room up at the top where if you want to buck, he's not connected to your hips anymore. His hips are separated from your hips, so it doesn't do a whole lot of good. But here's the deal with Tony Ferguson. He's always got a great, great answer. By the way, this is very Luke Rockhold, Chris Weidman-esque. What does he do? He's going to come back down. He's going to bring his legs around. Now, this is not a technique that normally works, but Tony's not an ordinary guy, is he? So what he's going to do is he's going to use this to rock and push and create an angle and off balance, which he does. And I want to show you something that Tony Ferguson does here. This might be one of the best shrimps I have ever seen in a UFC title fight, and let me explain why. So here he's created an opening. Look at that. He's got Lee to rest on a hand, and he's separated the angle. So it's not just that the other leg is on the other side. The other leg is now up. So he's broken the structure that Kevin Lee had at the top there. And watch what he does here. He's going to put his weight underneath. Just take a look at this. I was so amazed by this. Look at Tony Ferguson's shrimp. That is a shrimp that you do holding on for dear life, and he did it. These are small details, folks, but this is why Tony Ferguson in October of 2013 got a win over Mike Rio, and 4 years later, he's the interim champion. Small details like this. Everyone likes all the fun stuff that he does and his risk-taking and all that's great. I love it just as much as you guys. This is really the bee's knees right here. He's not sliding his hips along the mat. He's lifting his rear end in the air, all the way in the air. Look at where his hips are before, flat on the mat. He's going to shove them in the air because it's going to create a much bigger pocket for him to then create, from here, an escape. You think this is no big deal. It is a big deal. These small details, if he had not been able to shrimp and escape, who knows what Kevin Lee would have been able to do. But from here, he got a shin in and could protect himself. Kevin Lee stands up and, of course, strikes him after the bell, which is no bueno. But I just want to point out, look at that shrimp, man. You see guys do this in jiu-jitsu practice warm-ups. You almost never see it in rolling. You almost never see it in competition. And you definitely don't see this kind of thing in MMA, where a guy is going to rest on his shoulder, from his legs underneath, drive up at an angle into the air because it creates a huge amount of separation for him. Monster, monster, monster shrimp from Tony Ferguson. Small details like this, when they matter, make a big difference. Blown away by both guys, blown away by the guard of Tony Ferguson, blown away by the passing, control, and expert mount of Kevin Lee. This fight delivered. I'm sorry that it wasn't Kevin Lee's time, but he's only 25 years old. I think he answers some skeptics. He's going to have a long, bright future, especially if they create a 165-pound division. I guess we'll have to see about that. But I really take my hat off to both of these competitors. They did their job on Saturday night. Thank you guys very much. Very, very, very entertained and amazed. And last but not least, we take a look at what's coming up in the week ahead. Actually, not much. Bellator has this Bellator Monster Energy Series at Talladega, but it's not any of their major talent. No one even has a Wikipedia entry. And the next UFC event is not till October 21st. And then, of course, after that, October 20th, Mohegan Sun is Mousasi versus Shlemenko for Bellator. So there is nothing coming up. I'm not sure what you guys want to see, but if you want to email me at Luke, or just email me, LukeThomasNews@gmail.com, and of course, Facebook and Instagram, Luke Thomas News. Send me an email. What would you guys like to see for the next Monday Morning Analyst? What can I do that would be of value to you? I appreciate you guys watching. Subscribe to MMA Fighting. Give the channel a thumb, or give this video a thumbs up. And I will be back next week with hopefully something to your delight, but we don't have any action of the major organizations to review. Until then, thank you so much for watching. Bye, y'all. Enjoy the fights.